In a previous video, I showed you your first FireMonkey 3D C++ application. Now we're going to go further into 3D and show how you can use 2D controls inside of a FireMonkey 3D application. So let's say File, New, C++ Builder FireMonkey Desktop Application. We'll do a 3D FireMonkey application. One of the components we can use to provide support for 2D components is a layer 3D. So let's put a layer 3D down. And inside of the layer 3D, we can use all the other components that are available in FireMonkey, buttons and list boxes and checkboxes and so on. So let's put a button, and let's make that button be a little bit larger. Then we can set whatever properties we would normally work with. So let's say click me, for example, for the text of the button. And if we double click, we get the event handler for the button. And we can just say button 1 text property is going to get the value 42. We run this example and click on it. Notice that the button and the caption become 42. By default, a 3D form has a design camera that's built in, which lets you see what it looks like in the design mode. A layer 3D also has a property called projection, and we can choose that projection to be the screen, and now we get a nice looking straight on view and the user interface. So we can have it not using a camera projection, which is the design camera, which is looking at how we can see it, but we can use the screen projection. And again, that's the property PJ camera and PJ screen. And we can put other kinds of 2D controls in here. So for example, we can put in a checkbox and have the checkbox have the regular properties you'd work with a check. We'll call this rotate to 3D shape. We can put in other objects. So for example, I'll put in a sphere. We'll put that sphere down here in the user interface. And we can set its width, height, and depth. And again, it's red by default. That's its material. And we can go over to the object inspector and type material. And again, I showed you in a previous video using the color material source. This time I'm going to use the texture material source. And I can load in a bitmap into the texture. So let's go and load a texture. I've got some textures over here in my sample pictures. One of these is the planet Earth. These are public domain images that you can use. And I can associate that texture with the sphere by setting the material source to be texture material source. And now I have this nice little Earth. We can scale it up a little bit in addition. So let's make it a little larger. And let's change this layer to be a little bit smaller and put it up at the top as a kind of a control panel. And we'll move so in this case, I'm going to use the checkbox to start the rotation. So I need to add an animation for the rotation of the Earth. And we're going to animate the property of the sphere, which is the rotation angle Y. So we can rotate it around, and we'll rotate from a start value of 360 and go down to 0. And we'll set that to be a loop. Like I did in a previous video, I'll leave enabled false, and then I'll use this checkbox to start it rotating. So again, this nice mix here inside of a 3D FireMonkey C++ application. We've got some 2D controls and a little control panel up at the top. We could even align it to the top of the client area. So it sits at the top, and then we've got our planet Earth down here. So let's go and use the checkbox and say that on change. So whenever the checkbox changes, we can set the float animation 1, it's enabled, equal to a checkbox 1, it is checked, which is Boolean. So if it's checked, it'll rotate, and if it's not checked, it won't. So let's run this example. And of course, it's rotating really fast. And let's go back and set the animation duration to be something a little slower. For example, maybe one rotation every 3 seconds. Now we've got 2D controls in a 3D layer. And we have our sphere here, which is a 3D object that we can rotate. And when we uncheck and we check, it just continues. Let's go back and look at the sphere. Two other properties that I want you to take a look at are the subdivision axes and subdivision's height. The larger the number you specify for these two values, the smoother the sphere will look. If we double the number of subdivisions and if we double the subdivision height, so let's run it again. Now notice it's a smoother sphere. than it was before. The default values were 16 and 12, but you can raise that number up. And just to show the texture support with 2 spheres, let's add another sphere. And we'll put it over here on the right. And we'll set its default height, width, and depth to 3. And we'll set its scale factor to 2. And let's load a texture for this one as well. So we'll say texture, material source, and give it a bitmap. In this case, we'll choose Mars. And then we'll say that sphere 2 gets texture 2. And now we've got Mars over here on the right-hand side. We can also give it a float animation. Maybe it'll take a longer time to rotate. And we'll set it to loop. We want to rotate the rotation angle Y. And now we have 2 spheres, so we'll rotate the 3D shapes. And here we'll just copy this code and float animation 2. And let's run this example. And now we've got both planets rotating. And again, notice this is smoother. And of course, this is a little bumpier. So we can go back on our 3D shape here and set the number of subdivisions. We'll just double them so it looks smoother. And again, we've got that, and the 3D control is working. You can run this on 64-bit Windows. And here's a 64-bit app. It's running in the 64-bit address space. And we can run it on Macintosh. So just start up the planets rotating. And again, the user interface works. Now let's do one other thing. Let's go to our 3D form. And let's turn off use design time camera. And what we'll do is we'll put cameras on the user interface. In this case, we'll put 2 cameras. So what we'll do is work with camera 1 and camera 2. We'll set them so that they're just pointing at the center of the display. And we'll set their position, camera 1 to be minus 30 in the 3D scene, and camera 2 to be minus 80. And then we'll go to the form and set camera 1 as the camera that we're going to use. So it's the closer in camera. We've got it right there. And then we can set camera 2. And now notice we're further away from the planets. The other thing we can do is put an animation on one of the cameras to animate the Z-axis, for example. So let's choose camera 1 to do that too. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a float animation, and we're going to put that on the camera. And we're going to move the camera around using animation value. So we need to set the property. And what we want to do is take the position Z, and we'll change that so the camera moves in and out. We'll use a couple other properties of the float animation. We'll do an auto reverse this time. We'll set the duration to be 5 seconds. We'll keep it disabled for now. We'll set it enabled using the checkbox. And we want it to loop. And then we'll set the value to start at 0, 0. So it's going to set position Z to 0. X and Y position of the camera already 0, 0. And we'll go out to a stop value of minus 80. So we'll move far away, and then it should come back again. And since we've got it set to loop, it should keep going in and out and in and out. And then over on the checkbox, we've added the code to enable animation 3 when the checkbox is checked. So let's take a look at this. So here we are really close, and we're going away. And then the auto reverse happens, and we come back in. And we go past it. Actually, it looks like we went right through the planet Earth. And again, remember that you can use the design camera on the form down here. And you can also have multiple cameras. In this case, we had camera 1 and camera 2. And you could choose that. So you might even have multiple cameras with multiple views in your 3D application. So that's some more that you can do with FireMonkey 3D on Windows and on Macintosh.